Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. Today is November 9, 2021. We want to thank Rob Grant for hosting us today. I'm probably wrong about everything. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you guys. Have fun.
And it's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Dorit Cypis, but please pronounce it the way it's correctly. Thank you.
So my father would say, Dorit Cypis.
Dorit Cypis. Thank you so much. It's an honor and a pleasure. Where are you calling in from?
I'm in my studio in Chinatown, Los Angeles.
Chinatown. How cool is that? And I'm in Venice, California. The first question is, what's the best thing for a human being?
That's a huge question. Best thing? What do you mean by thing? The thing.
Well, that's good. You already know how this operates. You're answering a question with a question. So we're just here to have fun, like go invent new questions, new metaphors, but all the questions you put into the context you want. So it's more like your hunch, your impulse, or your intuition. So you can answer it how you would like.
The best thing for a human being. Maybe I would shift it to say, what's the best thing for being human?
Yeah.
I mean, that would be my first intention was to shift the noun to a verb, being human.
Yeah.
I don't know what a human being is actually, and I don't know what a thing is, but I know that to be human, I have to be very present to myself in order to be open towards you.
Oh, that is brilliant. You did so well because I like that my goal in doing this for 40 years is always to think about the question itself. And in essence, what you did was evoke Bucky Fuller when he said, I seem to be a verb. And American Indians, indigenous people, some of them, they go, we have no nouns, we only have verbs. So I really like that. What's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
Well, by information, I hear various strands. I hear, on the one hand, stimulation, sensorial stimulation. On the other hand, I hear, cognitive or linguistic information. So I think we take in information both somatically, sensorially through my senses, my body, and cognitively through my thinking, my language and thinking mind. My favorite source of information is the world.
Nice. I have to tell you what, you might know him, Norman Klein. He taught at Cal Arts.
I do.
I said, what's your favorite form of information? He goes, honest. So he shifted it from a noun to an adjective. So I really like what you said, because people in general might not go. The world, they don't. This first time I've ever had that answer. They usually go reading or the internet or YouTube or, so that was really beautiful. You broke it down well. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
We can't help ourselves.
That is good. So do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
It's both.
Yeah.
I think it's human, so it's utterly, we can't help ourselves, and then it's consolidated and institutionalized and constructed into manners and reasons and stratification and hierarchy. Yeah, so it's both.
Do thoughts create emotions?
Absolutely, but emotions create thought too.
Yeah. And on thinking, is thinking more innate or more invented?
Both.
Yeah.
I think the human being is innate and constructed. It's both nature and culture,
Yeah.
and is a kind of Mobius strip between the two. And it depends on awareness and kind of level or capacity for um, recognizing or sensing that places you somewhere on that Mobius strip of
Yeah.
directing your life or not, or being directed.
I like that. Fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until
I don't know what I think until I identify the emotion under the shadow emotion underneath the thought.
That is deep. The shadow emotion under the thought. Wow. You really retrieved that question, do thoughts create emotions? Because McLuhan said, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it.
Mhm.
So that was good. Until I identify. Identity is something I want to go into you. So you anticipated the upcoming questions. Can humans think without language?
Can a baby think?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. I wouldn't want to ruin it with an answer, but but it is beautiful how you're answering a question with a question again. And well, it's sort of like let's go into what Chomsky said. Language is not just words; it's culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is.
Mhm.
What do you do when language does not work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
I don't wait for language to break down. I have to sense, and I have to feel, sense, listen, um, see, um, hear at the same time as I listen to the words. So words to me are never necessarily privileged as the privileged way of knowing or receiving information. I have to recognize the confluence of other ways that I'm receiving information at the same time as I'm listening to words.
Right. So I love that word privilege. I hope you can suss that out for me in this context. But also, let me repeat back what I sort of think I got from what you just said. So you would tell me where I got it wrong. That when someone's talking to you, you're almost like in an anticipatory, mindful way trying to understand what they're saying besides the words coming out of their mouth.
Yes.
And what is put the word privilege there because it might I don't quite understand what you mean by privilege there. Put suss that out a little more, the way you use the word privilege.
Well, I think Western culture privileges language as a way of knowing. Privileges it over sensing or feeling or seeing or hearing uh, or touching. Privileges it above other ways of receiving information.
In your by language, you're meaning spoken word.
Yes.
Yeah, that was clear. Thank you. In general, I know it's both and it depends. There's a few of these either ors at the beginning. It doesn't mean the two I'm giving you are there's many options, and you have to say either one. But in general, your observations of humans, are they more feeling beings or more thinking beings?
Are you asking a question about my observations of people, or you're asking my what I think about people?
Yeah, I mean, it's a blend of it. In you, yeah, what do you think of people? In people in general, are they more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Um, you know, uh, I I think I look for an integration. I look for how a person both
Yeah.
thinks and feels. I'm very aware of being in relation to someone who's doesn't feel or doesn't understand or recognize the other ways that they're affecting me or themselves. And I'm also very aware of people who don't think or assess or recognize what they're feeling, and, are only in an emotional state and not don't bring it into a cognitive reflection.
Yeah.
So I guess I would privilege a blending of the two, a kind of integration of both.
Yeah.
And I think people are capable of that, but everybody is from 1 to 10 on different volume controls on that
Yeah,
yeah.
that was well put too, because it sussed it out. Because I think that you can't really separate thinking from feeling, but since we invented the words, we think we can,
Right,
because they're so integrated that you can't really, it's like the mind-body connection. We
right.
want to say, yeah, that was good. So these are two questions from Alan Turing, 1950. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Is thinking a function that assumes that the soul has a particular function, or even assumes that does it assume that it has a ultimate function or a privileged function? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I think it could be one function of the soul, but I don't know that I would say it's the function. Or I don't know. I don't know what the word function and soul. I'd have to spend a lot of time parsing out how those two words go together. I don't know how those two words go together
But
exactly.
Dorit, it's amazing because what you did was I just added this question in the last half a year, and most people go, well, they challenge the word soul, or they go, well, I don't know what the soul is. No one's challenged the word function yet. They've go, well, what is fun? So I appreciate that. The other Turing question was, can machines think?
Only if people program that into them, but I think that people think that machines can think, but it's the shadow of the person, and it's just a projection because machines don't have the capacity of thinking without being programmed by a person thinking that the machine can think.
It's a great answer. I actually got that about a week ago, and he goes, that is a good, very good. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
They're related. I don't think I pursue specifically one or the other. I think sometimes happiness comes from meaning, and sometimes meaning comes from happiness.
Yeah,
So I don't know that I would separate them.
yeah. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away, and we're detecting it, or are we actually creating it?
I think we believe that we're creating it. What's really going on? I don't know. I think that's the ultimate question of being alive. And so I'd have to say I don't know.
Yeah. What's faster, the speed of light or speed of thought?
I don't know. I can't. I know there's a formula for the speed of light. I don't know if there's a formula for the speed of thought. And then is thought is not, it's not a fixed thing. I don't know that it can be fixed like light. Light is a scientific um, quality that can be measured. I don't know if thought can be measured in terms of speed. So I don't know that those two go together.
So Audre Lorde, the poet, said you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded and said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
Wow, that's beautiful what you just said. I love both those people. Been very important to me, Audre Lorde and Yvonne Rainer. Um, Yvonne Rainer also said emotions are thoughts too. No, emotions are facts too.
Wow,
Um,
thank you. Facts too. Yeah.
mhm. um, you know, I was so taken by my mind just went to thinking about Audre Lorde and Yvonne Rainer, and I forgot the question.
No, that's totally cool. Again, I love your deep listening because most people don't acknowledge who it's coming from.
Uh-huh.
They're focused on see, a lot of my questions, I'll set them up with a cute quote and then I ask the question. It doesn't mean that the quote has to be integrated with the question. But in this case, when I say, you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools, and you can if you expose the tools, what new tool do you suggest? They think to dismantle the master's house. But it's again, if you put it in the context, I'm basically saying, what new tool do you suggest? Just in general, but you can say, oh, specifically to dismantle the master's house or in general.
Well, I guess I sort of, without knowing it, conjured a tool. I don't know if it's a new tool because my mind went immediately to imagining a conversation between Audre Lorde and Yvonne Rainer. And I think another tool that I would add is is dialogue. It's
Yeah,
not just about the tool; it's about the engagement.
yeah. No, that is so good because it's not when I say new, it implies like, oh, you mean like TikTok or some new tool. And one of my favorite answers ever was intuition. And I was like, we don't think of that as a new tool, but it's like dialogue. I mean, that's basically what you just said is McLuhan's main thing. He said, two people talking face to face is that's it. I mean, not that's it, but it's important. And I say, a quote somewhere I got is two people talking is the revolution. It is an amazing thing. And the beauty of this tool is that we met in person face to face and almost had like a live Zoom for a couple minutes. And then I said, oh, will you do this Zoom interview? And in essence, I'm bowled over by the services of Zoom because people are sort of forced to be in a face-to-face dialogue, you know.
Right. I agree.
So, yeah.
David Bohm said the same thing, the physicist.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, he wrote a brilliant dialogue, basically an element of physics, like the critical element, that approximates physics theory is dialogue itself.
Say the last part again. Is what?
Is he was a physicist and he worked with uh, kind of the science of physics. But he wrote this brilliant book, and towards the end of his life, he focused physics onto its equivalent with humans, and he said that would be dialogue.
I
The
see. Yeah.
dialogue in itself is analogous to now I don't know too much about physics, but I'm fascinated by what I don't know. So I am fascinated by physics, but like the physics of dialogue. I mean, if someone could like draw that out for me in a physics formula, that's what David Bohm saw in his head.
It's beautiful. I appreciate that. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Oh, I worry about um, very simple things, and it's about being human. I worry about losing my focus or my perspective, or I sometimes if I go to bed and I'm feeling especially uncertain or doubtful, um, it's a very bad sleep, and waking up is very difficult and complicated by my own humanness. That's probably what I worry about most.
McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, whether they're tangible or intangible. And Pound was sort of saying we can look to the artist to reveal these. Sometimes people call them unintended consequences or hidden psychic effects of our inventions. And if we do, we could learn to cope with what we don't like about these inventions. So everybody's fretting what Facebook is doing to the world. And so, how do we cope with it? It's not going to go away, and it's like coping is probably a smart way to deal with them. So, that was one of McLuhan's main questions I asked you. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though we can turn to the artist to reveal them to us?
I think it's a design flaw.
That is great. So you mean the human itself, whoever or whatever designed us? That is amazing. Again, that's like, how do we cope with our design flaws?
That's why sometimes I have a hard time sleeping at night. It's my design flaws that I worry about.
Oh, that was amazing because some of my questions go off like they're sort of a pattern, and then they go whoop whoop, and they jump around. And that's the first time I've ever had those two connect. I shot that worry question in because Errol Morris asked not Haldeman, one of those guys in a recent movie, what do you worry about when you go to bed at night? And I went, that's a good question. Because I think there's a fine line between worry and concern. Like when my
Mm.
mom died, she was a worry wart and everybody knew it. And I went to the wake service and I said, there's a lot of people in this room who worried that Dolores worried too much.
Mhm.
And I says, maybe it was just her concern. I mean,
Mhm.
how do you differentiate between worry and concern?
Those two words, I think concern is important. Like we need to be concerned. I think worry can become a habit or a pattern
Yeah.
that's just repetitive and reactive rather than strategic or kind of intentional.
Yeah. Boy, you are good with words. I appreciate this. Um, are you more afraid of, say it again?
No, that's the first time anyone's ever said that to me. I never think I'm good with words because I'm actually ESL. English is my second language, and I've often felt like I don't, you know, or maybe it's because English is my second language that I enter into wormholes to try to decipher what is meant.
Yeah. What's your first language?
Hebrew.
Well, no, I'm sincere. I think this is what I do like 3 times a week, talk to people for 90 minutes, and it's so interesting how they put their words together.
Mhm.
And I appreciate how I feel that I'm understanding what you're trying to say,
Mm.
what you're saying, Um, are you more afraid of old ideas or more afraid of new ideas?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah. Can you conjure up your earliest memory or one of them?
I can.
Can you tell it or describe it briefly?
Yeah. I remember maybe age 2 or somewhere around age 2, spending a lot of time worrying and making a mental list of all the things I was worried about. See, I was and I remember some things on that list. The first thing was I'm oh my god, soon I'm going to have to cross the street by myself. And then another was, no, I'm going to have to use a knife and fork. Oh my god. And another was, they're going to send me to school. I'm going to go to school. And I thought all the way up to, and then then I'm gonna have to get married, and then I'm gonna have children, and I just make these mental lists of all these things I didn't want to do.
I love to ask kids, I go, "What's better, being an adult or a kid?" And they go, "Kid,
Yeah,
way better."
way better.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Absolutely both.
Yeah.
It's absolutely both. And memory is also in the present. It's not in the past.
Wow, that's heavy. Wyndham Lewis said, "Artists live in the present and write a detailed history of the future."
Mm, that's interesting.
Like, be here now. That was good. Okay, so tell me, please, within your immediate and then outside your immediate family, someone who had an impact on you or a role model, just briefly, what was that specific impact?
Someone within my immediate family and someone outside my immediate family.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. In my immediate family, I'd say my older sister, Ada, um, who was born with Down syndrome. She had a huge impact on me. I was second born, so born after her. Um, I, I often think about that aspect of my birthplace as instrumental in shaping me. So I would say Ada. And then outside my family, uh, oh my God, are you asking like anyone in my entire life, or someone from my early childhood, or does it
Ye
matter?
It does, it's really what comes to you first. It's usually I'm seeking out early, but you can say anyone in your whole life who, what specifically was that impact, and who was it?
I mean, there's hundreds of people. Like I'm immediately drawing on like Pablo Neruda.
Good. So what did you get from him?
that he was both a dedicated postal worker and a dedicated poet.
That's good. Yeah.
That he didn't separate art and life.
What did you, let's just go back to Ada. What did you get from Ada? What's the sort of like trait, or how would you summarize sort of what she helped you form in yourself?
I think it's complex. One thread that's easy to explain or share. My mother, this is in Israel, in Tel Aviv, dressed us alike from when I can remember. So I must have been maybe after the age of 2 as a toddler, and Ada would have been 5, up until age 7 or 8. She dressed us the same, and her reasoning was that Ada would reflect on me and learn a broader capacity for herself. She would see me, mirror me. And then I realized, I think about this a lot, that she never asked, how would I reflect on Ada to form myself? You know, that Ada was my mirror, just as I was Ada's mirror. That Ada was responding or reflecting off of someone that was born, you know, with kind of normalized behavioral traits, and I was mirroring off of someone who was born with not normal, kind of quotes in quotes, culturally framed human traits. And for the longest time, I mean, I think it took me a long time to feel in control of my own identity. I mean, control is too harsh a word, but feel at home in my own identity, as separate from her and different from her. It took me a long time, but and I've often thought of that as a negative. But very recently, over the last year, I've thought back on that and see kind of the shadow positive underneath that, that I had a huge long incubation period that most people never have an opportunity to experience myself reflected by someone who was held as different and other by the culture. And even though I was seen as the normalized person, that's not how I was feeling inside. I identified with otherness and difference, and with a huge, long, probably into my 20s, incubation period of experiencing that. And I think that in hindsight, you know, has added so much to my understanding of being a human being and being in a world of difference. That identity is human, and identity is fluid, but we're boxed into categorical identities by the culture we construct, with a hierarchy of better and worse. So we lose our sense of fluidity. And also, identity is inevitable because we're not the only one in the world. We're one amongst many, and so we have to create identities in order to differentiate and communicate. And that identity makes difference. It kind of codifies names and frames difference that we get stuck in. And I think because I had, 20 years or more of this fluid relationship between my identity and hers, I have a better understanding of how to develop tools, which is what I do professionally, to unlock our fixed understanding of identity and our fixed understanding of difference and otherness, to open it up into a more generous and generative engagement, and that's in a sense what my practice is all about. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it answered it very well, and it was again, I really felt you communicated it to me clearly because one is my older sister had a special needs son, and now he's 35 and doing great. And he was sort of mainstream. They call it mainstreaming. You know, if like your mom was sort of trying to mainstream you and
Yes.
your sister, whatever.
Yeah.
And his older sister would say Micah doesn't have special needs, he has special abilities. And
Mhm.
so she shifted what? Oh, because you're walking down the street with Micah and he would say hello to anyone, a dying wino junkie, hi. And like most of us, like, oh, you know, and it was like, this guy is amazing to be with. But he, you know, so I agreed with her. I says he has special abilities. But
Mhm.
you know, in the normal societal terms, they want to your words like otherness is really important rather than saying like in that world you can't say certain words, and I understand, but I would ask, well, what's the word we can use now? And they go neurodiversity, and I goes, well, that's what everybody we're all neurally diverse. Thank God.
Right.
So did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Um, Quasi, I would say they were raised me in a particular culture, which is Jewish, but Jewish coming from they were Eastern Europeans. Their families of they were born. Both my parents were born in Poland, and so came from Eastern European upbringing. But my father really believed that his heritage was Turkish Jewish, and I've learned to see, you know, when I'm asked what religion are you or what culture are you or what race are you, I just say I'm multi-ethnic Semitic.
Right.
Um,
That's
and
good.
I think there's lots of threads in there. If you want to, you want to know more, get to know me. That's all I'm going to give you. I'm not going to
That's
peg it any
no,
further.
that was a good answer. And do you pray?
In my own way, I do, but I don't have I meditate, and I don't think of an entity that I pray to. It's I think I try to I more focus on intention, my intention in relation to connecting with um, uh, uh, a situation or a location or a person. So I wouldn't say that I'm religious in the traditional way, traditional sense. Um, but I would say that I do believe that there are energies um, beyond being human. Uh, Energies. I'm really nothing to say. I know nothing about it. I know nothing. But I think that the universe is made up of more than us at the top of the food chain.
Yeah. Thank you. If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
What would I like if God exists? What would I like God to say to me after I die? Um, it reminds me of the question reminds me of a dream I had when my father was dying, and he had a very hard time dying. He wouldn't let his body go. He just really held on, and I finally realized that um, he didn't know how to die because he was a survivor. He was a genocide survivor. He only knew how to survive, so he couldn't die. And I was trying to help him to let go, and I didn't know what to do. And one night, in my dream, his father, who had been killed, I never knew his father, but his father in my dream came to me, um, very in full dimension, and stood next to me and put his arm around me, and said to me, I wonder why my son is so sad. Why is it so hard for him? After all, he was the one that survived. He had a life. Why can't he just let go? And and then he looked at me and he said, if only my son could see how much I've changed since I've died, then he could die.
Oh my God. That is heavy. So, can you forget to die?
Can you forget to die? That's an amazing question. Forget kind of implies that was in the past. But death is always ahead of you. I mean, your death is always ahead of you, but maybe we've died before and we can't remember it. So I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I really appreciate,
Maybe.
because what I like too, and I appreciate this discussion, is that you don't feel like you're discouraged when you say, I don't know. People, so when I ask these questions, when they go, I don't know, it's sort of like they think they're failing or something. And not knowing, and you knowing this is important. And I think you know about what's called unlearning. We're not always trying to learn. We want to unlearn too, but
Oh God, I hope.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
That's the Hannah Arendt question.
Is it really? That's good.
She would say all people are capable of behaving as if they're evil,
Yeah.
that it is sewn into our design, not to be surprised by it or not to think that we're possessed, that it is just a potential that we have to be aware of.
Yeah. No, that was good. So, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? I'm going to set this one up with a few modern thinkers' thoughts. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you react to the Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I don't agree with that. I think the enemy is not just between, it's also within. And that the enemy outside of us is often mirrored somewhere within us. And perhaps if I acknowledge the relationship between the enemy outside of myself with the enemy within myself, then I actually don't necessarily empower, but I gain some insight into uh, uh, what kind of an engagement I need to strategically choose to not create more chaos and violence.
Thank you. James Joyce was started one of the first cinemas in Dublin called Volta Cinema. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Design flaw.
That is a great line. What first attracted you? I mean, basically, what I understand, you're sort of you're artist, educator, and mediator. Those are sort of three of your pursuits. So, what first attracted you to be an artist, to pursue art? Did you go to art museums growing up, looked at art magazines, or your parents took you to in at what point did you find an aesthetic of what art is and you said, I want to do that? Like, what was it? To sort of walk us through the kickover point,
I was so my parents I was born in 1951 in Tel Aviv, 3 years after the creation of the State of Israel. My parents lived there during the 30s as Palestine. And my mother's family had been wealthy Eastern Europeans and art lovers, and they were able to bring some parts of their collection, which was old history paintings from Europe, from the early 19th century and late 18th century. And so there were half a dozen paintings that I was surrounded by in my growing up in Tel Aviv that were huge history paintings, like incredible oil paintings. I stared at them and fantasized and made up stories and entered them, through my projection and daydreams and whatnot. But I didn't think about them as art or know that they were famous or any of that. It was just a reference point for me to understand that there was more to the human imagination than the daily life I lived. When I first went to university, I didn't go to study art. I went to study psychology and sociology to answer the question, which I held from early childhood, maybe because of my relationship to Ada. And the question was, why are we each different from the other? Why are we each in different bodies? Like, what is this? What's going on here? I wanted to understand human difference and the cultural divisions that came with it. And after 2 years, in studies, after 2 years, and this was the late 60s, and both those topics we were still living in a time where everything was quite binary and object, subject, everything was separated and there was no question about subjectivity or how the scientist affected the thing they were looking at. None of that discourse was present. But intuitively, I sensed something was wrong. And I remember after my second year asking myself or recognizing, I said, wait a second, I'm being trained to study others and to understand the circumstance and the context of other people, not like me, and to help them to better their lives or their condition. How pretentious is that when I don't know who the hell I am? Like, this is ridiculous. So I dropped out because my professors couldn't. I went to them, I asked that question. They said, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, what's the problem? So I felt terrible. Like, I felt this is pretentious. So I dropped out. And then it was in the year the dropout year where I lived at home and didn't know what to do with my life. My mother, for some reason, said to me, maybe you need to learn how to like draw or something. Like there's something different about you. I don't really know what to do with you. Like, where are you going to fit in? Your questions are so like weird. So she made me go to some drawing class. It's at a community art center. And I found it fascinating, like the teaching of drawing, the teaching of looking at what's outside of you and then processing it and then coming out with a representation of. I found that fascinating, and I came out with this myself. I don't I made it up. I said, I know, I bet artists can ask the question I want to ask. So I said, okay, I'll be an artist. And then I said, oh, okay, now I have to, like, how do you be an artist? And I faked a portfolio. I just faked a whole portfolio. I did performance. I did all kinds of weird stuff. I just said, I don't know what this is. I'll just do all this stuff. And got into the most conceptual art school there was in Canada, the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, in 1971, which was a kind of sister school to Cal Arts. But in my experience, actually much more interesting than Cal Arts, because I went to both schools. But anyway, that was my first encounter with imagining being an artist and pursuing that process. I had a goal. I wanted to understand how to ask the question, who am I in relation to you? And I said, I don't know, I'll figure it out as an artist. That was it.
Wow, really, McLuhan's up there in that area at the same time, and one of his favorite quotes was, "The Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can." And it was just sort of like when you said I faked it, it's like faking a portfolio for an art. That's what it is. But you can actually say it and then not be, it's like you said it. But I mean, that's what art is. It's like, anyways, like art is the lie that tells the truth, blah, blah, blah.
Right, right, right,
Yeah.
right.
So I mean, that was really sort of a cool revelation. So a screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says great art is when you clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process?
Hmm. Um, I think the magic spot is somewhere between. I think I need both. I'm aware of both. I'm aware of, I need to start, I often need to start with an intention or like a question or a fascination or a curiosity to unpack something or understand something. But if I'll go in and at some point I need to get lost in order to find something other than what I was looking for. um, and then come back out and look at it and like find a new intention. So it's a dance between the two.
Yeah. Yeah, I call that jujitsu or judo, the push and pull, the dance between. That was beautiful. Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your viewer when you're making your art?
Um, it's part of, at the beginning of the process. I don't. At the beginning of the process, it's really all about me. I'm very aware of my subjectivity and my need to understand something or accept something or recognize something or experience something. At a certain point, I don't know if it be, I think it may not become art until there's somewhere in the process where it goes beyond me to thinking about an engagement with the viewer, the other. And if I pursue that then it can maybe turn into art for me. So I have a lot of work in my own studio that's just mine, that hasn't cooked to that final point. And I don't know if it's art or I don't know what it is. I mean, it doesn't really matter to me, actually. But I do know that, like, right now I'm involved in a inventorying process where I'm trying to understand the last 50 years of my production, and inventory it in a fashion in order to decide, what do I owe it? What do I owe that? And I'm realizing that there's so many aspects to what I created. Some of it was very, on that pole between initiating a process just for me and extending it further to you, and then finalizing it so that there's some kind of integration. There's some work that's in my studio, that's done that, and it's had an incredible public, its own public existence in museums and discourse and written about, and it's bigger than me. It's like I'm just a tiny part of it, and I feel like maybe I may change my mind, so I don't know yet because I'm in the process. I'm thinking that I may owe more to that work than to work that was more of just a beginning initial doodle that never made it outside my journal or my studio. But I may change my mind. I don't know, but I think so. That in a way answers your question, because for me a huge variable is did this work become public and engage in a discourse larger than me?
Yeah.
Um, and does it then have more value than something that did not?
Yeah.
I think it does, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. You really inspire me with your questions. That's what I'm about in a lot of ways, and it's always inventing new questions and new metaphors. And the next question is: do artists have a moral obligation?
A moral obligation?
Yeah.
Moral. To whom?
Yeah. Again, great question. Well, this is a new question I just added recently. And one answer was everyone has a moral obligation. But it is interesting because you know as well as I do, uh, in what we talked about a little in our first encounter, we know about transgressive artists or subversive artists. And some may say, well, Piss Christ is not a moral, that guy had no moral obligation. Or we might make value judgments in the big societal norms that's not like, it's blasphemy or whatever. So, yeah, to whom? We can just leave it at that. You answered the question, to whom? Yeah, I mean, that's fine to leave it at there. What do you think the motive of the cave artist was? Not what Herzog did in his movie or anthropologists say, but just your hunch. What was the motive of cave artist?
Well, I can't pretend to really know cave artists. I don't know them. And I've seen some I've never seen any live. I've seen some representations of cave artists, whether it's in southern France or I've seen some native drawings in caves in northern Minnesota. What their intention, I think, was an engagement between them and other energies. I don't know, I can't say which energies, because I think energy is specific to culture. So yeah, some engagement, because it's a representation. So to represent is to communicate.
Yeah.
even if it's with yourself, you're trying to engage some kind of internal discussion or discourse or process of questioning as an engagement. So it was about engagement.
Yeah. I like that word. That's well done. Thank you. So, if you could have any artist in any era do a portrait of you, who would you like?
I have a portrait that I kept, a pencil drawing that was made by a man who was experiencing homelessness, and he was sitting in front of the Hollywood post office station where I went to get stamps or something, and he was sitting in front, asking people if he could draw them, and uh, I I told him that I would, when I came back out, I would see if he was still there, and we could discuss that. And I came out and he was still there, and he made a drawing of me, and it was fantastic being in an engagement with him while he was um, with this image kind of came to life that I don't know if I don't think it looks like me. I think it resembles aspects of me for sure. But I was as interested in him in his process of making the drawing as much in that as in the final drawing.
Yeah.
Um, and I've kept that drawing to remind me of that experience. Um,
Beautiful. It's a beautiful answer. I just interjected it because we did discuss. We both knew Mike Kelly, and when I asked Mike, what artist would you like to do a portrait of you? He goes, the cave artist. And I always love that answer. So I just thought I'd throw that in there.
that's
But
great.
you brought up this word humanness or humanity early on, and I use it in trying to ask this next question. Is McLuhan said everything we invent extends some humanness. So clothing's extension of our skin, knife and fork extends our teeth. You could say the shutter in a camera or projector is an extension of our eyelid. And then, there's like philosophy is an extension of some humanness. What is the drawing utensil, since you've used that in your art, whether it's a pen or a pencil or a painting? What does that extend? What humanness?
You know, the writer Hélène Cixous, French, Cixous, Cixous, asked that question brilliantly in one of her books. The whole book was writing to her hand, holding the pen, writing. The whole book was written in asking questions of her own hand, writing the question. Like, what is moving my hand? From where are these words coming? Like, what is motivating or translating within me through the pen or my pencil to this text? And it's a rhetorical question. We don't know. I don't know. I certainly don't know. But she asked it brilliantly.
It's great. I'm so glad because I did read about her recently somewhere, and it's beautiful. I didn't know that about her. I asked a poet who runs our Dante reading club, what does the writing utensil extend for you? And he goes, tears. And I was really touched by that because, you know, this thing with the pencil, that it's sort of evident that, well, it extends the finger because you could draw lines in sand. You don't need a pencil and a paper, but he sort of got the idea. So I really appreciate that. I'm going to investigate her further in
It's actually the book she wrote specifically on this is called The Book of Promethea.
thank you, of Promethea. Yeah. So I spoke with this filmmaker, Michael Apted, about 40 years ago. I said, why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? He said, because we've learned to take in information faster. This was right when MTV was coming out and rapid montage was flourishing. Um, even Marty Scorsese said, I'm cutting my films faster because of MTV. Can humans literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
Again, you know, you asked questions before about information. I think you'd have to specify um, what kind of information.
Yeah.
Um, and I think some information is easy to inhale, and other information not. So the kind of information that's created by media like MTV is easy information. It's all surfaces. It's all just scratching surfaces. Harder information, kind of the information that might come to you through meditation or a kind of more sensorial. You know, it kind of reminds me that like the Western doctor will take your pulse and he or she will feel one beat for the heartbeat on usually your left wrist. If you go to a Chinese acupuncture doctor, he or she will feel your pulse on your left wrist, and then on your right wrist as well. But within that one beat, he or she will feel 7 striations. So 14 levels to one beat. So that I feel the same about information.
Yeah. Wow, that was really good because I learned years ago, just before I got to college, that Eastern philosophy will walk, the guy will walk down the street and look at the flower and smell it. Westerner will pick the flower.
Take it.
And, yeah, and take it. And then the Easterner will, you go to your doctor and you don't say, give me a cure or remedy. They teach you how to maintain your body. Whereas the Western philosophy is, oh, could you give me a cure? Can you give me a remedy?
Mm-hmm.
So that's really a nice way to describe those differences. Thank you. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Depends when.
Yeah.
I think you need conviction to compromise.
Yeah.
And sometimes you need to compromise your conviction.
Yeah. You've accomplished a lot. Rate these 3 elements. What played the biggest role, second and third? Luck, skill, and ambition.
I can't.
Poetry, has been said by a poet, is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
My specific inner dialogue,
Yeah.
it's not always language.
Then, like, describe your inner consciousness. How would you describe it?
Infinitely. I mean, sometimes it's a texture or a color or a nuance of form. It's it could be atmospheric or opaque or transparent. Sometimes it's in a form, it's imagistic. Sometimes it's I once had a dream, and this dream was so blew my mind. It was it was just one, like, it was like black. It was like black atmosphere. That was the dream. It was just a black blackness, but it was atmospheric. It wasn't solid. And then all of a sudden, my own handwriting, not my hand, just the writing, spelled out in script the question, can I be dropped from history? And that was the entire dream.
That is deep. There's an artist, George Manupelli, he said, ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says, there is no self-expression. Cecil Taylor, the great jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. So I know it's both and it depends, but just in general, your thoughts, please. Is art making more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever culture or technology is dominant?
I don't think the word more functions well in that scenario.
That is a great answer. All my questions, like the either or, I always stress the word more, and you go, more doesn't function well in that question. Thank you for refining that. Can art making be egoless?
I don't know. Because art making, uh, you can, like, I go back to, like, my older sister Ada loves to very openly, randomly paint, draw. With no, she's not trained. I'm like overly trained. She's not trained at all. Is what she does art, or is what I do art? Is what she does comparable to what I do, or vice versa? I don't know, and I don't think it matters. But it's all based on, I don't know. I guess, context, or why there may be a specific reason why we may need to qualify something as art versus not art. Um, uh,
Well, it goes back to that quote, the Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can. So
mhm.
that was good. Is perception reality?
No,
Lewis Carroll said, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
impossible things. Yeah, all the time.
Name one.
Name one. I think naming it destroys it.
Yeah, that is a great answer. Naming it destroys it. Oh my God, you're really helping me. Um, Tell me one major element of your art, your creative process that's changed since you started, and one major element that stayed the same.
One element that's changed and one element that stayed the same. Um, I think that the first decades of my art making life, were much more innocent and, unconscious. And, I don't think I'm that person anymore. Um, so that's changed. I think experience and life has weathered me away from innocence. Um, I don't think it's better or worse. I think it's different. But I look back, like when I'm doing my inventory, I look back at early work in the 70s or 80s, and I'm stunned by what I created. And I know that back then I had no clue what I was doing. I was just following an instinct or um, an inspiration or a motivation, or maybe um, trying to fit in with the Joneses, art, blah, blah. Um, and I had no clue, of course, you know, of what I would know 40 years later, either. So that relationship to innocence and consciousness has shifted dramatically. What hasn't changed? I'm still asking the same damn questions. Who am I in relation to you? It's like it's different ways of, you know, doing so, but it's the same thing.
Well put. Thank you. Moshe Feldenkrais says that it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
I love the work of Moshe Feldenkrais, and I agree with him.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I have turned my fear, which I know early in my life was a deep weakness. And in fact, I think the first, I don't know how long, many years of my life, I was almost catatonic with fear. Um, I'd say I have turned that into a strength. Um, I haven't necessarily overcome my fear of life because I don't necessarily trust human beings any more than I used to. But I have come to peace with it and an acceptance that human beings will always potentially hurt others or myself, but they can also be extremely loving and generous. And that, so I haven't overcome or kind of corralled my fear and turned it into something else. I've transformed it into acceptance.
Wow. That was well put, and it inspires me. Anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
When it's responsive, not reactive.
Yeah. These are 5 Alan Watts questions. Just briefly off the top of your head, whatever impulse. Who started it all?
I think who is the wrong word. I don't know if there was a who.
Are we going to make it?
What is it? We will make. I would leave it there.
Yeah. Where do we put it?
Um, Release it.
Wow. Who's cleaning it up?
Each of us.
Is it serious?
Sometimes.
Wow. How do you find peace of mind?
Um, Becoming quiet. Um, Becoming quiet.
Yeah. There's a line that goes, "You create what you resist." I'm not saying you, like one creates what one resists. Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into "You are what you hate." James Joyce said, "It's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve." And Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, "Thank God I'm an atheist." How do you react to this thought? You know, what you resist persists, or you create what you resist. Any thoughts on that?
I think resistance often comes from blind habit and pattern, uh, and can often, stultify and get fixed into like a bias, and then definitely, create your life, or create has affects life, you and others. So resistance is often, I mean, if the resistance again is responsive rather than reactive, like if there's a cogent, conscious, thoughtful intention to resist, then resist, do it as a strategy. But if it's happening through blind sight, it's probably controlling you.
We've got about 10 more minutes, and I want to thank you. This has been truly enlightening, and I appreciate your time. You know, as a mediator, you tackle subjects like history, identity, and social relations. And I think it's been throughout this discussion, you've enlightened me, and I think identity came up, search for identity. Like Alan Watts always says, everybody's trying to figure out who they are, and if you find out who you are, you're fucked. So but we want to feel we know sort of who we are in the this relationship to our environment. And McLuhan said an interesting thing. He said violence is the quest for identity and the meaningful. And he said spiritual or physical violence, and less identity, more violence. And Christian Murdy sort of said the same thing. But I'm just curious if you would just discuss this a little. Violence is a quest for identity, or why you include identity in your practice as a mediator.
Because I think identity is the crux of conflict. Because we often, I think that uncertainty and insecurity and power relations manipulate identity. Um, and that, if you were the only person on earth, you wouldn't need an identity. Identity is about relationship. It's in relation to another person's identity. And I think as it's a complex field, and as the world gets more and more mélange in its diversity, there is more and more conflict around identity, group identity, as well as personal identity. So identity is relational to me. So identity is not just about me. But I think that's where we get stuck, that we think that identity is just about me. And we want to own it, or we want to possess it, or frame it, or have it, or hold it higher than someone else's. But I think we've got it wrong. I think we've got it wrong.
Yeah. Reminds me of the Joyce line from Finnegan's Wake: love thy label as thyself. What's the most significant difference between women and men, physical aside?
I think that's a question that needs to be updated, because I think we're in an era of really a kind of a re-understanding or expanding our understanding of gender. So which male and which female? I would have to ask you, not all male and all female.
Yeah. It really does need to be updated, and I'm glad you challenged me. No one's ever challenged me on that. What caused matriarchy?
Caused it? It
Yeah.
caused it? Caused matriarchy, assumes that matriarchy exists. I'd have to ask you where and when.
Yeah. I've had that response. That's very good from someone who has studied these anthropologically. If you study like Maria Gimbutas and Rianne Eisler, they'll say there's cultures where,
Definitely.
you know, and, you know, uh, I don't know. I mean, it's funny because I think what caused matriarchy is biology, that women give birth to the baby, give birth. And so that's sort of the origin of maybe who's going to make the decisions here. Like, or not so much decisions, but, you know,
But
I don't know.
this is exactly where Dave Chappelle got in trouble recently.
And
And
tell me about it.
his Netflix performance, most recent. Um, what is it called? I forget the title of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
The Closer.
the
The
closer.
close.
That's it. The closer. Thank you. Because he intimated that gender exists. The gender, you can't, in the relation to transgender. He basically said, but we've all come from a woman's body.
Yeah.
You can't not come from a woman's body. So isn't gender implicit? Isn't male female just an implicit fixed thing? And of course, in relation to the question on where's trans fit in, and where do people who have experienced transition and believe and feel, through hormonal, reconstruction, that they are no longer the gender they were born. And he was taken at that word. He was taken as an anti-trans person.
Yeah.
And that's why there's so much pushback. Or, as I understand it, one of the reasons why there's so much pushback to his performance.
Yeah, it's interesting too because I used to show the film by Fellini called Satyricon, and it has
Mhm.
a hermaphrodite in it.
Mhm.
And it's been said that maybe that was the first humans on Earth were both male and female.
Mm.
And then there are people who are born with both.
Mhm.
And so it's just something that needs to be brought out, discussed. And that's what's important, I think, that we suss out how our feelings on this.
Mhm.
And, you know, it doesn't, I think you're distinguishing between responsive and reactive is really important.
Great question for a mediator.
Mhm.
Yes.
Is it okay if I ask a really
Sure.
quick question? Then I'm going to jump off. I just
No.
want to say, I was listening to the whole thing, and I out loud, you elicited a whoa response from me, which is not involuntary, especially when you're talking about the dream of your father and your grandfather. I was like, whoa. I was just getting audio, but I was like, I got to see what this looks like. So thank you so much for what you shared today. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel so privileged to have heard it all.
Yeah.
This is my question. It's a quick one, but it's based on what you had been talking about. And I'm going to kind of put it back to you, but you shared a lot about dreams, creativity, and these moments in your life, the language in which you originally were born into, Hebrew, and then learning English. And my question is that in your life, in your experience, your subjective experience, has your understanding been more based out of like aha moments, or has it been kind of a constant unraveling?
Mm. I'd say both, and it reminds me of in 1988, I lived in Japan for a month, and a colleague of mine there took me to see a friend of hers who is Chinese living in Tokyo, and she was a professional Chinese astrologer. And for some reason, my friend said, "You need to meet this woman, and we need to ask this woman to read your Chinese astrological chart," which we did, and she did. And the astrologer, and I only understood what she was saying through a translator. So I may have heard it wrong, and it may have been translated wrong. So I don't know what really happened, but what I heard was she said, human beings in the Chinese system, every human being is born with at least one of 3 stars that are somehow assigned to their energetic form. And everybody has at least one. And some people have 2, and very, very rarely people have 3. And the stars described, and again, this is where I'm not sure if I'm getting it right at all, but this is what I think I heard. Star 1 was life before birth, that your dominant life focus has to do with the energies that happened with your life before birth. Star 2 is life on Earth, that your dominant kind of modality is to filtered through your life on this Earth.
Right.
And star 3 is somehow modulated through your life after death.
Van Gogh.
That's already provocative, but she looked at me and she did my chart and she said, "You have 3. You come with 3 stars." And I said, "Okay, like, what does that mean? Like, what do I do about that? Like, that sounds a little intense." She said, "What it means," or again, this is through translation, so who knows what I really heard, what she really said. She said, "People who are born with all 3 stars are at birth, have within them all the knowledge that they will ever know from in their life. You already have everything you can know, but your life is about deciphering what you were born with."
Yeah.
So I think I'm just constantly just going, is it or is it like all of it? Like I'm just like going, where did I hear that before? Like, wait a minute, that connects, and especially as I'm aging, I just turned 70, and now it's like I'm looking back and going, oh my God, that dream I had at age 2 is like the seed of everything, like I now get what I didn't know then, but that I come to me.
Yeah.
That's the best I can answer that.
That's a brilliant. I mean, even as
Yeah.
you're saying that, what came to me was I sometimes feel like I'm always learning things again. And I'm like, oh, now that makes sense.
Mhm.
And I think that there's knowing now, like we can look back at what we once knew,
Mhm.
Like it's called presentism. When we look back at the past and we're like, what was I thinking? But that's not necessarily a fair judgment to make because what you thought then was totally different than really
Right.
what you know and think now.
Right.
I want to thank you both again just for what you've given me the gifts today. I'm going to jump off so that you have more
Thanks,
space.
Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, that was great. Rob's a great guy, and it's such a great channel. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's a great title. So just a couple more. Thank you so much. If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Hold on. Hold on. It's going to be more of a ride than you imagine. Yeah.
What gives you the most optimism?
that nothing changes under the sun.
Wow. Thank you so much. I sure hope we can do this again. We would love to have you on again where it's all three of us and we talk specifically about um uh pick topics or whatever, but this general sort of scripted interview I've done with people for years was really fun with you and I learned so much. I thank you a lot.
It's a pleasure. It's really amazing questions, and you're weaving your web like you're like a spider, like with this web, that you're trying to catch new nuance in the web. Is kind of very fascinating. And can I send this like to my sister? Is this like a link or something?
Oh yeah, we'll send you the link soon.
Okay,
If not by this evening, you'll get it in the morning.
that's great because I'd love to. Some
You can
people
share it.
will smile, I think,
Yeah.
hearing
Oh,
it.
you can definitely share it all you want. It was live TV, so it's another phenomenon that we can experience through
Wow,
this meet. Yeah.
crazy,
Crazy.
crazy.
Thanks again.
Pleasure. Thank you.
I'm gonna hit the goodbye button. It was really fun
Okay,
and thank you.
adios.